Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 2 of As the Distance Learning World Turns. I decided to dig deep into the vault and find something a little more interesting. It's a little dated, a couple years old, and obviously that sure as heck isn't Virginia in the background. That's Colorado, and boy, do I wish I was there mountain biking. Anyway, here's what we've got in store for you this week. We are going to be focusing on characterization. But before we get into that, a quick shout out. Let's do something fun for our class time on Wednesday and Friday. Here's the catch. We'll try and mix it up and come up with a different theme, and I'll ask you guys to give me some ideas. But the theme for our online class for Wednesday and Friday is wear your favorite crazy hat or hat. Yep, we're breaking the school rules. Wear a hat. It's all good. All right, I'm going to switch slides and then we're going to get started. That is a different slide. All right, as you can see, this week we're going to be talking about characterization. This should be a review for most of you, but we're going to really dig deep and try and think about the true interplay between characterization and plot. So let's go. Actually, before let's go, please keep in mind that I've posted, in addition to this video, I've posted a link for the story I'd like you to read and for the formative activity that I would like you to have done for class. So this is basically your asynchronous work. If I see you on Wednesday, make sure it is done before class on Wednesday and turned in. In fact, you should be tomorrow's your asynchronous day, so you should be working on that then. If I have you Friday, you should try and get that done by end of day tomorrow as well, but you do have another day, just to keep that in mind. It's just the way it is. All right, let me switch slides here and kind of get into the meat of what we're going to be talking about. So, folks, don't forget, the interaction between characterization and plot is everything. Without characterization, you don't have a story. Characters are what make the stories work. They're what enable writers to build their plots and make them engaging. It's frankly why we read. We find characters that we identify with. We certainly enjoy reading about people who are radically different than we are, or maybe we wish we were a little bit like them, or the characters that are just really easy to hate, the villains that we can easily despise. Keep in mind that it just doesn't work without it. So understanding that characterization is really the number one driver of the plot, how characters respond to the conflict, how they cause conflict, is everything. All right, so let's start a couple review things to think about for today. This should be easy for you guys from last year. There are types of characters, protagonist versus antagonist. Again, Shrek and Lord Farquaad work perfectly for all of these. At its simplest, your good guy and your bad guy. Round versus flat. Round is your interesting character. They're multi-dimensional. They're not just one trait. And certainly Shrek starts off seeming that way, but he's got a lot going on. Sense of humor, sarcasm. At the end, he becomes very understanding, kind, all of those things. Lord Farquaad, he's the bad guy all the way through. He doesn't have many other traits other than that. That's what defines him. Absolutely. Static versus dynamic. That's obviously a huge one for plot, because how characters relate to and respond to conflict and what happens as a result of that conflict when they beyond the climax tells us a lot about what they've learned or haven't learned. So characters who go through that internal change become very dynamic. Those who don't go through any internal change are static. Your bad guys are almost always static. They're just the bad guy at the beginning, middle, and end. With your dynamic characters, we see them evolve and grow and change. And Shrek's a perfect example of where this happens. All right, so with that in mind, the most important thing you need to think about is how writers give us information about characters. Because if we're going to talk about, hey, are we seeing different changes in their traits? Are they changing, growing? We need to really be sure we understand how that is revealed to us. So this hopefully is review again. When the writers just tell us directly, they use those words, they are absolutely more direct than indirect. We're going to look at the specifics for each and then some examples, and then we're going to dig deep into some samples for you guys to play around with. So let's go to the next slide. So on this first slide, again, the indirect characterization is the one that is much more subtle, and it ends up being much more interesting. It's when we learn about the words and actions of a character in such great detail that we're able to infer the character traits. At no point are adjective used that specifically describe the character, just what that person says or does, and we do this every day. So take a look at this example. So here, what's straightforward is when you see somebody knocking into several students as he shuffled into the classroom, we know this is somebody who really doesn't care about other people and doesn't regard their free space and is pretty rude. Slouching down, has this mean-spirited grin, and he says in here, it's hard to read for you guys, this class is so full of losers, I can't believe I have to put up with you. Thinks he's better than everybody else. That's done more subtly and more interestingly, but we certainly have a clear sense of this character. Whereas direct characterization, it's so simple. The writer states the trait. Angry, rude, uninterested, superior. Those are the exact things that we just learned about the character in that other slide. So you as a reader need to keep your eye on this, and you need to be able to make sure that you're making those inferences with indirect characterization as you read. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some examples. I'm going to let you read, pause, and then we're going to let you think about what type of characterization is being used, direct or indirect. Remember, direct characterization, they state the traits. Indirect, it's all inferences. So here we go. Take a look. All right, so this line from The Hobbit is completely direct because he's described as angry, and although we don't use these words, bewildered, bewuthered, they're explaining exactly what he's like. All right, here's another example to take a look at. All right, so from this, we're really taking the quote from one character at the top, and then our narrator, your main character from Twilight, at the bottom. And we can clearly, again, infer, because it's never stated directly, that she is quite attracted to this guy, and she is certainly feeling romantic. And we get that through the description of just her lips curving into an involuntary smile. All right, let's try again. So for those of you who did read the Bass River and Sheila Mant, again, well, the minute you say nervous, that's everything. We know exactly what this character's like. Versus, and again, I know that not everyone read this story. Thank you, ma'am, but this is a great example of how she is a tough woman. She is not going to take anything from anybody, and well, that says it all. All right, let's try another. So for those of you who remember Ray Bradbury's story, All Summer in a Day, this is the story where it rains only once every 7 years. At first glance, you'd say, wow, that's some really great description. That's got to be indirect. But it's not. It's actually direct because it says she's a frail girl. And then he just goes on to describe that frail nature that she has. One more. Okay, this one, for those of you guys remember reading In Your Hat. Okay, Now what you're looking at is the activity you're going to be doing for this week, and it's really making sure that you guys can look carefully at characterization, either direct or indirect, be able to describe those character traits, describe the characterization, and then discuss really how this character helps develop the plot. All right, so this is very simple. As you read, you're gonna you will see that I've attached a story or a link to a story called "The Treasure of Lemon Brown." You may want to read it a couple of times. As you read it, you're going to want to think about and look for character traits that, as you first start this story and you meet the main character, you're going to want to just write down a personality trait here and give evidence from the text. So that's going to either be a line of direct characterization or indirect characterization of how we know that. And this is expandable, so no worries. You're going to do the same thing as you get about midway through the story. So kind of skim over the story first. Again, I recommend reading it twice, once for understanding, and once go back and make sure you understand that text. Let me scroll down here. And then at the very end of the story, because this is where you're obviously going to draw some conclusions about, is this character static and dynamic, things like that. What are some of the traits that describe the character at the end of the story? The final thing you're going to do is you are going to, it says right here, to tell us how did the protagonist change from the beginning to the end of the story. And separately, excuse me, what role did the conflict and the events in the story play in these changes? So think about, we're talking about our central character, our protagonist. How did the events of the story enable him to change? So have some fun with this. Enjoy it. Everything will be posted here on Google Classroom. And I will see you either Wednesday or Friday in your goofy hat or your favorite hat. Have a great week, everybody. And, oh, now I'm going to give more information later.